I think we're live right now. Hi, I'm Tim O'Brien. I am the Senior Executive Editor of Bloomberg Opinion, the commentary arm of Bloomberg News, and I'm here with two of my amazing colleagues, Nia-Malika Henderson and Frank Wilkinson. They are both politics and policy columnists for Bloomberg Opinion. And of course, we're here this morning to talk about the main event from last night, which was billed as the Trump-Biden debate, but in practice, it really became, I think, the Biden belly flop in many important ways that we should discuss. There was a lot of anticipation about how both candidates would take the stage, the kind of energy they'd bring to the debate, and whether or not their performances would affect how the rest of the presidential race this year would proceed. And I think for anyone watching it in real time, on Thursday night, there was a marked contrast between both men when they took the stage in the very opening seconds and minutes of the debate. So let's just take a quick look at a clip of that from last night and set up a conversation after that.
Now, please welcome the 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Folks, how are you? Great to be here. Thank you.
And please welcome the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump.
So Nia, on one side of the stage, you have Joe Biden shuffling in very stiffly, looking very much like the senior citizen that he is, and with that kind of stiffness in his back and gait that we've seen on the campaign trail this, in recent weeks, whether he's going up on, the stairway onto a plane or walking around at various campaign events. And Trump coming in as we've known Trump to come in, looking like he's ready for a bar fight and he's hanging out in the corner, ready to try to thump somebody. And there had been a, speculation that Biden would come in with the kind of energy he demonstrated at the State of the Union address.
Yeah.
And that Trump might show visibly more of, I think, some of the degradation that has been visible with him at his rallies, particularly over the last 4 years. He's a little more hunched over, he's nonlinear, but really not a lot of that came with him last night, at least in my estimation, but I'm actually interested in yours. What did you think in those first few minutes of the debate?
Yeah, it was the old man shuffle, if you will, which obviously has been noticeable. Democrats have, noticed it and tried to sort of obscure that. But it was also his voice, right? There was a kind of mumble, right, with him addressing the moderators. Some of this would have been muffled, I think, if there was a crowd. There was no crowd. And I think by the end, it was Biden who might have needed the crowd, right? Because he was so isolated on that stage. His voice was so soft, even as he was trying to land harsher, more aggressive lines, he couldn't carry it off because of the voice. And you hear that voice in those first seconds of the debate as he's going out there. Trump, I think Trump.
Wait, that voice. Let's talk a little bit about that voice, because at least for me, I think the voice, it haunted, in a way, the entire debate, because what did that voice sound like to you?
Yeah, it sounded, some people say it sounded like maybe he had a cold or something like that. It sounded weak, right? And again, even when he was trying to get off good lines, he couldn't really pull it off because the voice just wouldn't carry the line because it sounded so weak and thin. So that was, from those very first seconds, was so apparent, and it was sort of the tail of the debate. The sound of his voice embodied kind of the whole problem of that debate.
A kind of rasping weakness.
Yep.
That felt very tangible.
Yep.
What were your thoughts, Frank, when things kicked off?
The same. I mean, obviously, he had that halting step. The problem, I think everyone would have forgotten that pretty quickly. The problem was that his speech reinforced the halting movement, his inability to grasp debate points, which again are very different than issues, debating, especially a demagogue like Trump, you have to do it in a very different fashion. This is not Paul Ryan. This is not Mitt Romney. He was unable to parry that kind of fire hose of demagoguery that Trump, you knew Trump was going to bring to the occasion. So I think each piece of his debate performance reinforced the others in a very bad way for him. And actually, when Nia was just talking, for some reason, I had a memory of Richard Nixon's shadow, his 5 o'clock shadow. Remember, that was
in the Kennedy-Nixon debate.
Exactly. In the Kennedy-Nixon debate, he looked like he had this shadow on his jowl, and then people.
And he also, he had a fever, and he was sweating actually during that.
Also sweating. There were things that reinforced problems that Nixon had, which is, already a lot of people distrusted him, and then he came out with this shadow that people sort of commented on. This was in some ways Biden's 5 o'clock shadow, in that he could not get rid of it throughout the entire debate. It just clung there. And obviously that's what brought us to this kind of panic, instigated by both media last night and Democratic consultants and others saying, "Ooh, we're in trouble."
There's a long history of incumbent presidents doing debates and then getting hung up either on seemingly shallow physical problems of various sorts, or bad lines, misstatements, or a challenger really laying a heavy blow. And that's just been true, I think, in the modern debate era, Nia, since that Kennedy-Nixon debate in 1960. And I was at some level, it's entirely shallow. And the fact that we're kicking off our discussion right now, looking at these clips of Biden, a lifelong public servant, shuffling in and looking addled and old, and Trump trotting in like a frat boy ready to rumble. And it would be shallow if it actually didn't have an impact.
Yeah.
And I think that the reality, as you know, because you're a veteran observer of all of this, is that these emotional tethers and these shallow physical things sometimes turn elections around, don't they?
That's right. And listen, I remember Barack Obama's first debate with Mitt Romney. It was terrible. And people, I remember a Democrat texting me, essentially saying, President Romney, right? People were just tearing their hair out over this. That's kind of what Democrats do. At the end of the debate, I think Barack Obama said, "Oh, this was a terrific debate." It was for Mitt Romney. And people last night were sort of likening this debate to that debate, right? "Oh, you remember Barack Obama did terribly." But I don't think anybody thinks that Biden could actually do better in another debate, right? Like, if there is going to be another debate, I doubt there will be. Maybe there will be, but he just couldn't muster the sense of command and control and strength that the average American voter expects from the leader of the free world, right? And maybe it's not fair that this is more about style than substance, but we have known that a debate is a television performance, and some people watch it for 90 minutes. Most people watch it in 30-second clips, and Biden knows that. He has been a student of history, a student of politics. I think there are debate performances that you can look at. Paul Ryan, the debate against Paul Ryan, that was a good one. He understands it, but he just couldn't.
He did well against Trump in 2020.
Yeah,
Biden.
He did.
His team, his campaign team, and his White House advisors, his sister Valerie and his wife Jill, all of whom helped steer him along through his political and personal lives. They must have known this too in advance, do you think, Nia?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain extent, if you look at the conversations leading up to this debate and some of the viral moments that we've seen from Joe Biden. Particularly, there's one, I think, at the White House, it's Juneteenth, and Kamala Harris is standing next to him. She is clearly engaged and present, right? She's clapping, she's moving around. And Joe Biden just looks a little out of it, a little perplexed. And who knows what's really going on with him physically and mentally in that moment, but it certainly is the Biden that showed up last night, right? There has been a caricature painted by, Republicans mostly, and Donald Trump, obviously. And that is the caricature that showed up last night. That was the person who showed up last night. And, I was flooded with Democrats, so nervous about this. And now we're in sort of fever dream territory. This idea of, is it possible to replace Joe Biden at this point? And if so, who would be the replacement?
Frank, I've been of the opinion that this was definitely a gamble for Biden because of his potentially frail state, but it was a gamble he needed to take because one of the biggest sort of ball and chains hanging around his reelection bid was his vitality and aging, with the unfortunate background music of that being, well, what if he were to die in office? And would, then Kamala Harris becomes president, and she's untested in different ways and targeted in unusual ways, as well as a woman and a woman of color in a still largely white male political world. Nonetheless, she's not a sure thing. She's not a sure bet herself. And so Biden's age played into all of that. So I do think it was wise for him to take this on as early as possible. I have to say I was very surprised by how out of it he was. And if his campaign knew that, Frank, I guess, did they just have to go forward anyway and put him up on that stage regardless?
Look, here's the thing. I don't know what happened there. I have been involved in debates in my life, though, and it is a high pressure situation and people respond differently. He may have been terrific one day in debate prep and not so good the next. And, he may have been bad throughout, but they thought, this guy's a trooper. He's been through it before. There is no certainty in going into these occasions. So you don't have the benefit of that. And you also have the inevitable political commentary going on in your own head if you are an advisor to any politician, which is, we'll figure this out. That's how this man landed in the White House, after all. We'll figure this out. People said he was too old 4 years ago. So, I wouldn't presume that there was, fear and loathing and dread in the Biden camp before he went up there. It may well be that they thought he would rise to the occasion, or he had some good debate preps and things looked okay. And he just got up there and it was a bad night.
And then fear, loathing, and dread arrived within seconds for them, undoubtedly, once he was up there.
In an avalanche.
Yeah, an avalanche of it. If this only tied to his physicality and the issues with his speech and his gait, even his presence of mind, it wouldn't have ended there. But he had moments where he could have rescued himself during this debate when different policy issues came up, particularly policy issues that are resonating powerfully with voters, issues like abortion or immigration or healthcare and Medicare. And in that context, let's take a look at another clip of Biden talking about Medicare.
We have 1,000 trillionaires in America, billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24% or 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 billion, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, you know, that one will never not be hard to watch, I think. The other thing about it is, you know, Donald Trump typically mugs and pantomimes and does a million different things when he's on the debate stage. He stalked Hillary Clinton famously in 2020. He interrupted Joe Biden repeatedly. But as I was watching that, you know, in this tragicomic way, Trump was also like embodying everyone's confusion as almost the avatar for the audience and the hosts of what is Biden actually saying. And that came up a number of times, Nia, during this debate on different issues like that one. But, you know, he couldn't even let a clear policy distinction and a policy choice anchor him in a way where he could land a glove on Trump and create a real awareness of both the acuity of his mind and the fact that he offered better leadership than Trump.
Yeah, you know, and he was spouting numbers in data, which might not even really be the best kind of strategy in a debate like this, in any sort of debate, because you're better in painting in kind of broad strokes. And so, but at least he sort of had the figures and had the wherewithal to correct himself when he was, you know, misspeaking. But then he just got lost, right? And it tailed off. And this was fairly early in the debate. And it was another sign that he couldn't deliver. He couldn't deliver on what he needed to do in drawing contrast in terms of policy, in terms of knowing the facts, in terms of being a messenger, right? Because that is what he has to do. He has to sell what he has done over the last 3 years to the American public, and he just couldn't do it.
And Trump, who's a serial fabulist and is also almost a textbook definition of someone who lies so frequently that it meets the definition of pathological, had a long list of whoppers and lies that he told during this debate. He said that blue-led states, Democratic-led states, allow babies to be murdered after they're born. He misrepresented the U.S.'s commitment to NATO overseas. He misrepresented his own legislative track record with veterans. He glossed over the fact that terrorist acts did indeed happen while he was president. He misrepresented the deficit, on and on and on. And when it came to immigration, he found ample room there to also finagle and misrepresent. And let's take a look at Trump, a video clip of Trump talking about immigration.
His big kill on the black people is the millions of people that he's allowed to come in through the border. They're taking black jobs now, and they're taking Hispanic jobs, and you haven't seen it yet, but you're going to see something that's going to be the worst in our history. We are living right now in a rat's nest. They're killing our people in New York, in California, in every state in the union, because we don't have borders anymore. Every state is now a border. People are coming in and they're killing our citizens at a level that we've never seen. We call it migrant crime. I call it Biden migrant crime.
I would call that Donald Trump hitching his wagon to racism, sensationalism, and bigotry in the service of scaring the American public and giving all of us an unhealthy grasp of what some of the real challenges that we face are in constructive and healthy ways, as opposed to divisive and racially colored ways, no pun intended. He also said during the debate that I think more than 18 million undocumented immigrants had, quote unquote, flooded into the country during Biden's term, which is also completely factually inaccurate. But this has always worked for him, Frank. It's not new that Donald Trump lies routinely. And while during this debate, he lied as much as he often does, pardon me, and I think wasn't stopped more often by his interlocutors, which might have been useful, though I think they did a good job trying to keep this debate on track. This never really clings to Trump, no matter how ugly the thought might be or how many times he lies. He's gotten away with this a long time, and he got away with it, I think, in the debate last night because he compared visibly so favorably to Biden. But you might have a different thought about that.
Well, I don't really, in terms of vigor. I mean, all of those lies were quite predictable lies. They're lies mostly that we've heard before, ridiculous numbers of, migrants coming over the border, that they're killing everybody, that they're taking everybody's jobs. This has been, this is 2015. He started that rant. He didn't have facts for it then. He doesn't have facts for it now. Obviously, they knew that was coming. Joe Biden knew that was coming. So that's a problem, that there was no answer to that. But there's also just a difficulty in democratic politics. And I mean that with a small d. Democracy is done in speech. It's done in words. It's done in declarations and constitutions and speech and debate, right? So if you have this kind of massive pollution of speech, which is what Trump brings time and time again, this just fire hose of lies, we're not well equipped to deal with that. And you can see that our media is not well equipped to deal with that. I mean, the moderators just had to sort of take the lie and then move on to the next question. Joe Biden was clearly not well equipped to deal with that, even though he had to know it was coming. But this is the fundamental challenge to democracy that Donald Trump represents, which is that you cannot have a functioning democracy in an absolute sea of lies. And, Joe Biden had two jobs, really, in my opinion, in this. He had to reach low information voters who are tuning into the campaign really for the first time, and he had to reach the double haters, the people who don't like Trump or Biden. I don't think he did anything to help himself with either one. And if you're a low information voter, how much of Trump's pure bullshit are you really able to discern? Well, we don't know, really. I mean, it varies person to person.
Well, even beyond that, does the bullshit really detract from him ultimately?
Well, it shows him as vigorous, and obviously his core supporters like the bullshit. I mean, it's something that they actually enjoy. And the ones who are cognizant of the lies, many of them actually like the lies. They think that's a clever tactic that he uses. So it's a very complicated challenge to democracy at large, and not just to Joe Biden.
Last night I was texting and emailing and various forms of communication with both of you on different subjects, because you're both smarter and wiser than I am. And so I was trying to get tutorials on the fly. But one of the things we kicked around, and then Nia and I have addressed this in different ways in some columns we wrote today for Bloomberg Opinion, but this idea of what does Biden do next? Does he stand down? Do his delegates get released at the Democratic National Convention in mid-August? Should someone be teed up now to succeed him? I'm of the opinion that he should do so as quickly as possible, because a lot is at stake beyond his own candidacy. I don't know that you're there yet, Nia, but you did focus on Kamala Harris's prospects. And what do you think about this sort of existential issue of whether Joe Biden's candidacy and if he's going to be replaced, who might be in the wings to replace him?
Well, listen, it is a real conversation among Democrats. Whether those Democrats are people named with the last name Biden is unclear. Part of this is, as political junkies, we always kind of imagine, a brokered convention, or they're going to swap out the vice president or the president. And so some of that is happening as well. I think it's unlikely that Joe Biden stands down and that he isn't at the top of the ticket. Is it a good idea maybe that he should strongly consider it? Sure. And in the meantime, you have Kamala Harris, right, who was tasked last night with polishing up a very terrible performance. And she, I thought, acquitted herself as well as she could, right?
Yes.
Given what she had to do. She basically argued that, judge him on the performance of the job in terms of governing and legislative achievements and caring for American people and addressing their issues in a competent way that improved their lives. That's her standard of performance, not, not being all about style, right? Style over substance. So I thought she did great. I think she's grown as a vice president. She stumbled early on. They kind of hid her away, to be honest. The Biden team did. And now I think she is emerging as their strongest surrogate. They have other surrogates too, right? I mean, some of this might have to be that the team of surrogates, the team of Democrats on the bench become a kind of Avengers, right? And pull him across the finish line. People like Kamala Harris would be in the lead, and then Pete Buttigieg and Gavin Newsom, exactly. That's likely what you're going to have to see if he's got any shot of winning this thing and instilling confidence in Americans that the presidency isn't a solo job, right? We all know that. He's got a real competent team around him, and at his right hand is Kamala Harris. And listen, there are people who don't like Kamala Harris, and there are people who really, really like Kamala Harris. And in many ways, the people who do like Kamala Harris are the very voters that he needs. And these are, people of color, younger voters. So we'll see what happens, but certainly at the very least, this kind of generation of Democrats that's behind Joe Biden that he quite frankly promised to pass the baton to, right? He kind of campaigned saying that he would be a one-term president, a bridge to the next generation. I think that's going to have to start to happen in these coming months.
And Biden has also surrounded himself with very capable team in the White House, talented, dedicated public servants who now have a proven track record. And Trump has historically surrounded himself with incompetent kooks. And there's no reason to believe there won't be shades of that in a second White House visit by him. Right. But then again, elections aren't management report cards. They really are about the emotional traction and connection voters have with presidents. Do you think, Frank, that Biden is so irretrievably damaged by this debate that he should just do the right thing and make way for a replacement while there's time? Or do you think that's rash?
I think that that's not going to happen. I don't think pundits are going to be influential here. I don't even think leading Democrats are going to be influential here. They're going to look at polls. I would not be surprised if there is not a huge amount of hemorrhaging in his support. We have a very polarized electorate. People who know they're voting for Biden know why they're voting for Biden, just as those who are adamant Trump supporters know. If Biden loses some of that support, and it's significant, I think that conversation will move from pundit land and worried Democrats to the Oval Office. If that hemorrhaging in poll support does not take place, I think there's no question that Biden will continue.
So Nia, does this make it more likely that Donald Trump will be elected president come November in your mind?
Listen, over these last many months, we've seen polls, and maybe the polls aren't to be believed, but Donald Trump has had a lead in most of the polls in the important battleground states, right? And so does this help him in his bid to be president again? It certainly didn't hurt, right? I mean, I think Biden belly flopped. He missed a huge opportunity last night, and Trump did the bare minimum that he needed to do. He seemed slightly credible, right, next to Biden, and that was a worrisome thing. So I think you probably had a situation where there was probably maybe some small decline in Biden support. There's no reason for the people who were kind of double haters to join either of these teams. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it probably advantaged Trump in terms of helping him get back to the White House.
And the outlandishness of Trump's credibility next to Biden is,
Yeah.
for whatever Biden's multiple shortcomings are, he is not a convicted felon. He did not try to foment an insurrection to overturn an election. He's not been found guilty of sexual assault. He hasn't been impeached twice, and on and on and on. Frank, do you think that this accrues to Trump come November?
Look, he had a good night because Biden had a bad night. It's still a long way to go. We have an extremely erratic candidate in Donald Trump with a movement behind him that is also erratic and quite possibly dangerous. So we don't know. There's still a long way to go. Obviously, it was a terrible night for Biden, and people are going to be talking about that for the next few days, which is going to sort of redouble the damage, most likely. Events like people like us talking about it and showing clips. So sure, it was a terrible night for Biden, and that's good for Trump.
On that note of uncertainty, which is a healthy note, I'll bring our little chat to the end. We're glad everyone joined us today. Frank Wilkinson and Nia-Malika Henderson, writers extraordinaire. Thanks for joining us. And Bloomberg Opinion. We'll see you again soon.